On July 28, 2026, the ground beneath Kumamoto, Japan roared. A 7.1 magnitude earthquake, the strongest level on Japan's seismic intensity scale. Buildings collapsed, 13 lives were lost. Rescuers dug through rubble. And 634 meters above Tokyo, a broadcast tower weighing over 36,000 tons swayed gently in its foundations and did not crack. Not a window broke, not a cable snapped, not a single bolt failed. That tower is the Tokyo Skytree, the tallest structure in Japan. And the reason it survived is a technology that was invented 1,400 years ago by people who had never heard of engineering. Japan is the most earthquake-prone developed nation on Earth. It sits on the junction of 4 tectonic plates. It experiences roughly 1,500 detectable earthquakes every year. Some of them are catastrophic. The 1923 Great Kanto earthquake killed over 100,000 people. The 1995 Kobe earthquake killed more than 6,000. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake, magnitude 9.1, triggered a tsunami that took nearly 20,000 lives and erased entire coastal towns from the map. And yet, this same country builds some of the tallest, most complex, most densely occupied structures on Earth. Skyscrapers, broadcast towers, airports on artificial islands, underground rail networks used by millions every day. All of it on ground that can begin shaking without warning. How? How do you build the world's tallest tower in a country where the ground is trying to knock it down? The answer is not one technology. It is three. Three completely different philosophies of how a building should behave when the Earth moves. One of them is 1,400 years old. One of them was invented after a disaster killed 6,000 people. And one of them is so new that most countries have not adopted it yet. Before we go deeper, drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from right now and what time it is there. We want to see how far this earthquake engineering reaches. If you enjoy engineering stories that reveal what is hidden inside the structures around you, take 1 second to subscribe. It costs nothing, and it tells us these deep dives are worth making. To understand how Japan builds on shaking ground, you need to understand a wooden pagoda in Nara that has been standing since the year 607. The 5-story pagoda at Horyuji Temple is one of the oldest wooden buildings on Earth. It is not tall by modern standards. It is not made of steel or concrete. It has no sensors, no computers, no damping systems. And in 1,400 years of Japanese earthquakes, including some of the most violent seismic events in recorded history, it has never collapsed. Out of roughly 500 wooden pagodas in Japan, only 2 have ever fallen in an earthquake. 500 structures, 14 centuries, one of the most seismically active countries on the planet. 2 failures. Why? The answer lives inside the pagoda, and you cannot see it from the outside. Running from the base to the top of the structure is a single timber pillar called the shinbashira. It is not a load-bearing column. It does not hold up the building. In some pagodas, it does not even touch the ground. It hangs, suspended from the top, like a pendulum inside a clock. When an earthquake hits, the floors of the pagoda do not move together like a single rigid block. Each floor sways independently, in its own rhythm, at its own speed. The heavy central pillar sways too, but at a different frequency. And because the pillar and the floors have different natural periods of vibration, they move in opposite directions. The pillar goes left while the floor goes right. The floor goes left while the pillar goes right. They cancel each other out. The energy of the earthquake is absorbed not by strength, but by disagreement. 2 parts of the same building, deliberately out of sync, spending the earthquake's force against each other instead of letting it accumulate in one place and tear the structure apart. The builders of Horyuji had no mathematics for this. They had no computer simulations. They had observation, intuition, and centuries of trial. They understood something that modern engineers would not formalize until the 20th century. That the most dangerous thing a building can do in an earthquake is move as one piece. If every part of the structure locks together and shakes at the same frequency, the forces compound, the sway amplifies, and the building destroys itself. The pagoda's answer was to let the parts disagree. Let them argue with each other. Let the argument burn the energy. That is the oldest earthquake technology in Japan, and as you are about to see, it is also the newest. In 2012, engineers completed a structure in Tokyo that stands 634 meters tall, nearly twice the height of the old Tokyo Tower, the tallest freestanding broadcast tower in the world. and they built it using a principle taken directly from a wooden temple built in the 7th century. The Tokyo Skytree has a steel truss outer frame, but running through its center, from the ground floor to a height of 375 meters, is a massive cylinder of reinforced concrete. 8 meters in diameter, 11,000 tons of dead weight. This is the Shinbashira, reborn in concrete and steel. For the first 125 meters, the concrete core is rigidly fixed to the steel frame. But above that point, something changes. The core is deliberately separated from the outer structure. It is not bolted to the frame. It is not welded. It is connected only by oil dampers, cylinders filled with hydraulic fluid that act like shock absorbers between the two systems. When an earthquake strikes, the steel frame sways at its own natural frequency. The concrete core, because it is heavier and stiffer, sways at a different frequency. The oil dampers between them convert the relative motion into heat, absorbing the energy. The two systems fight each other, just like the pillar and the floors of Horyuji, and up to 50% of the earthquake's force is dissipated before it can reach the upper floors. 11,000 tons of concrete hanging inside a steel tower, deliberately out of rhythm with the structure around it, connected by oil dampers that turn disagreement into safety. The engineers at Nikken Sekkei call this system Shinbashira Seishin, in English, Central Column Vibration Control. They named it after the pagoda, because that is exactly what it is. A 1,400-year-old idea translated into concrete and hydraulic fluid, protecting the tallest structure in Japan. But the Skytree is an exceptional structure. Most buildings in Japan are not 634 meters tall. They are offices, apartments, hospitals, schools, and they need earthquake protection too. So Japan developed 3 distinct systems, each with its own philosophy, and every building in the country uses at least one of them. The first is called Taishin, resistance, the simplest approach. You make the building stronger, thicker columns, heavier beams, more reinforcement, denser concrete. The building does not move with the earthquake, it fights it. It absorbs the force through sheer mass and rigidity. This is how most buildings in the world handle earthquakes. And it works, up to a point. But Taishin has a limit. The stronger and stiffer you make a building, the more it attracts seismic force. A rigid building in a strong earthquake does not flex, it cracks. And when rigid concrete cracks, it does not bend like steel, it shatters. The 1995 Kobe earthquake proved this with devastating clarity. Thousands of buildings that met the Taishin code collapsed because the earthquake exceeded what rigidity alone could handle. After Kobe, Japan accelerated 2 alternative approaches that had been developing for years but had not yet reached mainstream construction. The second system is called Seishin, damping. This is the Skytree's approach, scaled down for ordinary buildings. Instead of making the building stronger, you install devices that absorb and dissipate the earthquake's energy before it can damage the structure. The most common Seishin devices are oil dampers, similar to the ones inside the Skytree, but much smaller. They are installed between floors, inside walls, or at the connections between beams and columns. When the building shakes, the dampers convert the kinetic energy of the movement into heat. The building still moves, but the movement is controlled, slowed, dampened. Think of it as the difference between a car hitting a brick wall and a car hitting a wall of foam. The car still stops, but the foam absorbs the impact instead of transmitting it. Seishin buildings can be lighter and more flexible than Taishin buildings because they do not need to be strong enough to resist the earthquake head-on. They just need to be strong enough to stay standing while the dampers do the work. But the third system is the one that changed everything, and it is the reason Japan's most critical buildings, hospitals, data centers, government offices, and some of its tallest skyscrapers can survive the most violent earthquakes on Earth with almost no damage at all. It is called Menshin, seismic isolation, and the idea is radical. You do not make the building stronger. You do not install dampers inside it. Instead, you cut the building off from the ground entirely. You place the entire structure on top of devices that allow it to slide, float, or roll when the earth shakes. So the earthquake moves the ground, but the building barely moves at all. How does that work in practice? Imagine the foundation of a building. In a normal structure, the columns are bolted directly to the concrete foundation, which is bolted to the bedrock. The building and the ground are one piece. When the ground moves, the building moves with it. Every shake, every jolt, every vibration travels straight up through the columns and into the floors where people live and work. In a machine building, there is a layer between the foundation and the columns. That layer consists of massive devices called seismic isolation bearings. The most common type is the lead rubber bearing. Picture a stack of alternating layers: rubber, steel plate, rubber, steel plate, compressed together into a cylinder roughly 1 meter across and 1.4 meters tall. At the center of the stack is a solid core of lead. When the ground shakes horizontally, the rubber layers deform. They allow the entire bearing to shift sideways, letting the building float while the ground moves beneath it. The lead core provides damping, absorbing energy and slowly returning the bearing to its original position when the shaking stops. The steel plates prevent the rubber from bulging outward under the enormous weight of the building above. A single building might sit on dozens of these bearings. The Sendai MT building, which survived the 2011 Tohoku earthquake almost undamaged while neighboring buildings suffered extensive cracking, experienced 23 centimeters of horizontal displacement at its base. The bearings deformed diagonally, absorbed the motion, and then returned to vertical when the earthquake ended. The building above barely shook. People inside reported feeling a slow, gentle rolling instead of the violent jerking that collapsed structures across the city. That is the power of Menshin. The earthquake moved the ground 23 centimeters sideways. The building moved almost not at all. The bearings took the punishment instead. Today, roughly 70% of all seismic isolation installations in Japan use lead rubber bearings. The remaining 30% use friction pendulum systems, which work on a different principle. The building sits on curved, low-friction surfaces that allow it to slide gently back and forth during an earthquake, like a ball rolling in a bowl. When the shaking stops, gravity pulls the building back to center. But here is the part that sounds impossible. How do you install seismic isolation under an existing building? What about the thousands of older structures built before Menshin technology existed? Japan solved this too. The National Museum of Western Art in Tokyo, designed by Le Corbusier and completed in 1959, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You cannot demolish it and rebuild. You cannot add massive steel braces to the exterior without destroying its architectural character. So in the late 1990s, engineers did something extraordinary. They cut the building's columns, one by one. While the museum was closed, workers excavated beneath the building, exposed each column where it met the foundation, and sliced through it. Then they jacked the building up by millimeters, slid a seismic isolation bearing into the gap, and lowered the building back onto the bearing. Column by column, bearing by bearing, the entire museum was separated from its foundation and placed on a new isolation layer, without changing a single visible element of Le Corbusier's design. The columns were cut into round slices because the space underground was too tight for large machinery. Workers inserted each bearing by hand in a space barely large enough to crawl through. The process took nearly 2 years. When it was done, the museum looked exactly the same. But now, when the next earthquake comes, the ground will shake and the museum will float. Le Corbusier's building, designed in an era before seismic isolation existed, is now protected by technology he could never have imagined. And nobody visiting the museum can tell that anything changed. If you're appreciating how deep this goes, this is the right moment to hit like. It genuinely helps the algorithm show these engineering deep dives to people who actually want to learn. Because the next part of this story moves from buildings to the ocean. On March 11, 2011, the ocean floor off the coast of Tohoku moved 50 meters in 3 minutes. The earthquake was magnitude 9.1. The tsunami that followed reached heights of over 40 meters in some locations. Nearly 20,000 people died. Entire towns were erased. 90% of Japan's existing seawalls failed. And in one small village on the northeast coast, a 15.5-meter concrete wall held. Every single resident of Fudai survived. That wall exists because of one man. Former Mayor Kotoku Wamura had lived through 2 earlier tsunamis as a young boy. He remembered what the water could do, and when he proposed building a floodgate and seawall taller than anything the village had ever seen, the community resisted. The wall was too tall. Too expensive, excessive for a small fishing village. Some called it a monument to his ego. Wamura did not back down. He had the wall built to 15.5 meters, 205 meters long, a concrete barrier between the village and the Pacific Ocean that, on calm days, blocked the residents' view of the sea they depended on for their livelihood. On March 11, 2011, the tsunami struck the Tohoku coast with a force that destroyed seawalls designed to handle waves half that size. Towns all around Fudai were devastated, but the wave that hit Fudai's wall was stopped. The water came up to the top. It did not go over. 3,000 people lived because one mayor had insisted on building a wall that everyone else said was too much. Wamura had died before the 2011 tsunami. He never saw his wall do the thing it was built for. He never heard the silence on the other side of the concrete, where 3,000 people were alive because he would not listen to the people who told him to build something smaller. Sometimes the most important engineering decision is made not by a calculation, but by a memory. A man who remembered what water could do and refused to let his village forget. Japan does not have a single philosophy of earthquake and disaster engineering. It has layers, 14 centuries of layers. A wooden pillar inside a pagoda that taught engineers how vibration works before the mathematics existed. A concrete core inside a broadcast tower that translated that lesson into the 21st century. Rubber bearings beneath hospitals that let the ground shake while the building floats above it. A seawall on a fishing coast built by a mayor who trusted his own memory more than the committee that told him to stop. 3 systems for buildings. Taishin, make it strong. Seishin, let it absorb. Menshin, cut it free from the ground. Every building in Japan uses at least one. The most critical buildings use all 3. And beneath all of the technology, beneath the oil dampers and the lead rubber bearings and the tuned mass dampers and the seawalls, is a single principle that Japan learned from a wooden temple before the rest of the world had a word for engineering. You do not fight the earthquake. You move with it. You let the parts of the structure disagree with each other. You let the disagreement burn the energy. And when the shaking stops, the building is still standing. Not because it was the strongest thing in the earthquake, but because it was the smartest. Every megastructure we decode on this channel starts with a question from you. What should we take apart next? Drop it in the comments. Hit subscribe. Turn on notifications. The next structure goes even deeper.